Okay, so we're diving into online gambling today, right? And I bet when you think about it, like most people, you think about luck, hitting the jackpot, the thrill of the game.
You got it. It's all about the flashy lights, the big wins, the excitement, but there's a whole other side to it.
There is.
Absolutely. Psychology. You see, underneath all those spinning reels and tempting promotions, there's this fascinating world of psychology at play.
Interesting. So, like, what kind of psychology are we talking about?
Well, for this deep dive, we're going to explore how online platforms actually use psychology to keep players engaged. We're not just talking about those obvious things like bonuses and big payouts.
Right.
We're going deeper. We're going to look at the why behind player behavior. What makes you tick? What keeps you coming back for more?
Gotcha. So what kind of stuff did we find out about this?
Well, we've got some really cool material here that breaks down all these psychological concepts that are at the heart of online gambling. We're talking about things like gambling fallacies, which are these mental traps that make you misinterpret how probability works.
Okay, I've heard of that.
Right. And then there are these psychological biases that can seriously influence your betting choices, sometimes without you even realizing it.
Really?
Yeah. And perhaps the most interesting part for me is how your brain's reward system, especially dopamine, plays a huge role in all of this.
Dopamine, like the feel-good chemical.
Exactly. It's amazing how these elements all work together to shape your whole gambling experience.
Yeah.
And even create that urge to keep playing.
Wow, so it sounds like there's a lot more to it than just, spinning a wheel or pulling a lever.
Oh, absolutely. And the interesting thing is that for these platforms, it's not just about making a quick buck. They're in it for the long haul. They actually want to understand you, the player, on a deeper level.
They do. Why?
Well, because the sources we looked at suggest that truly understanding player psychology, like what motivates you, what you need, is key to keeping you engaged for the long term. It's about building a sustainable business that benefits both the platform and the players.
Okay, that makes sense. So let's start breaking this down. Let's talk about this thing called the gambler's fallacy. I've heard this term before, but can you explain it for me like I'm 5?
Sure. So imagine you're flipping a coin,
Right.
and it lands on heads 5 times in a row.
Okay.
Now, the gambler's fallacy is that feeling you get that the next flip is bound to be tails. Like it's due for a tails because it's landed on heads so many times already.
Right. I get that feeling.
But the thing is, each coin flip is totally independent of the others. So even though it feels like tails is due, the odds are still 50-50. It's a new flip.
Oh, I see. So even if it landed on heads 100 times in a row, the next flip is still a 50-50 chance.
Exactly. And that's the core statistical principle to remember. Every random event, whether it's a coin toss, a roulette spin, a slot machine result, whatever, stands alone. The past doesn't influence the future.
Okay, so how does this gambler's fallacy play out in online gambling? I mean, those games are all about chance, right?
Absolutely. Take slot machines, for example. They're run by these things called random number generators, or RNGs for short.
RNGs, right.
And these RNGs make sure that every spin is totally random and independent. The odds of winning are the same for every single spin, no matter what happened before.
So it doesn't matter if the machine hasn't paid out in hours or if someone just hit a jackpot.
Not at all.
Oh.
Each spin is a fresh start.
But, I mean, I've definitely had that feeling before. Like, if I've been playing for a while and haven't won anything, I start thinking, okay, it's got to pay out soon, right?
Right. And that's the gambler's fallacy, tricking your brain. It makes you feel like you're due for a win, but statistically, the odds haven't changed at all. Each spin is just as likely to be a loss as the one before.
It's so hard to fight that feeling, though. It feels like it has to even out eventually.
I know, it's tricky. And that's because of our human psychology. Our brains are wired to look for patterns, even when they don't exist. So when we see something happening repeatedly, like a series of losses, we start to think it has to change. It's like our brains are trying to create order out of randomness.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then, there's this thing called probability independence.
Probability what?
Independence. It basically means that each event, like each spin of a slot machine, is completely separate from the others. But our brains sometimes try to connect them. They think, well, it's been losing for a while, so a win must be coming soon.
So we're basically giving the game a memory, even though it doesn't have one.
Exactly. We're imposing our own sense of order on something that's completely random.
Wow, our brains are kind of messing with us, aren't they?
You could say that. And it's not just the gambler's fallacy. There are tons of other psychological misconceptions that can trip us up when we're gambling. It's like our brains are working against us.
Really? Like what?
Well, There's this whole collection of irrational judgments we make because of things like cognitive biases, emotions, and all sorts of psychological factors. These misconceptions lead us to misinterpret what's happening and have totally unrealistic expectations.
So we basically lose our ability to think straight when we're gambling.
Yeah, you could say that's like you get so caught up in the moment that you stop thinking rationally. You get carried away.
So what causes these misconceptions in the first place?
Well, we already talked about our brain's natural instinct to look for patterns, even where they don't exist. That can be a big problem when you're dealing with random events like in gambling.
Right.
But there's more. Our emotions play a huge role too. Like think about how you feel after a big win. You're excited, right?
Yeah.
Maybe even a little bit invincible.
Yeah.
And that feeling can lead you to make risky bets that you wouldn't normally make. Or, on the flip side, think about how you feel after a loss.
Yeah, not so good.
Exactly. You might feel anxious or even desperate to win back what you lost. And that can cloud your judgment and make you chase your losses.
I see. So emotions are a big factor.
Huge. And then there's this thing called loss aversion.
Loss aversion, what's that?
It's basically the idea that we feel the pain of a loss much more strongly than the pleasure of an equivalent gain. So if you lose $10, it feels much worse than the joy you feel when you win $10.
That's totally true. I hate losing money.
Exactly. And that's why loss aversion can be so dangerous when you're gambling. It can make you take bigger and bigger risks to try and recoup your losses, even when it's not a good idea.
So we've got this pattern-seeking brain, we've got emotions running wild, and we hate losing more than we like winning. Sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It can be, yeah. And on top of all that, there's the fact that most people just don't understand probability very well. We tend to overestimate our chances of winning and underestimate our chances of losing.
So, with all of that in mind, what are some of the most common gambling misconceptions that we should be aware of? I mean, besides the gambler's fallacy.
Well, one that trips a lot of people up is the hot hand fallacy. This is the opposite of the gambler's fallacy. It's that feeling you get when you're on a winning streak and you start to think you can't lose.
Oh yeah, I've definitely felt that before. Like, I'm on fire, nothing can stop me.
Exactly. But the problem is, it's just an illusion. Even if you've won a few times in a row, the odds haven't changed. Each game, each spin, each hand is still independent.
So just because I won the last 5 hands of poker doesn't mean I'm guaranteed to win the next one?
Nope. It might feel like you're on a roll, but statistically, it's all random.
I guess that makes sense.
And then there's the sunk cost fallacy, which can be a real killer. This is that feeling you get when you've already lost a lot of money and you think, well, I can't quit now. I've invested too much.
Oh man, I've been there. It's like throwing good money after bad.
Exactly. You're so focused on what you've already lost that you're willing to risk even more to try and get it back. But the problem is, the money you've already lost is gone. It's sunk. You can't get it back by losing even more.
Yeah, it's tough to accept that sometimes.
It is. And then there's the belief in hot and cold machines or tables.
You mean like thinking that some machines are more likely to pay out than others?
Exactly. But again, this is just a misconception. If a game is truly random, like it should be, then there's no such thing as a hot or cold machine. The odds are the same for every machine, every spin.
Right. So it's not like a slot machine that hasn't paid out in a while is suddenly going to become due for a jackpot.
Nope. That's just the gambler's fallacy rearing its ugly head again.
So basically, we need to be really aware of these misconceptions and try to fight those gut feelings.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's all about being rational and understanding how probability really works.
Okay, so we've talked about gambler's fallacy and some other common misconceptions, but you mentioned dopamine earlier. How does that fit into all of this?
So dopamine is this neurotransmitter in our brains. It's basically a chemical messenger that's associated with pleasure and reward.
Okay, yeah.
And when we do something pleasurable, like eat a piece of chocolate or win a bet, our brains release dopamine, and it makes us feel good.
So it's like a reward system.
Exactly. It's our brain's way of reinforcing behaviors that are beneficial for survival. But the problem is, gambling can hijack this system.
How so?
Well, think about the thrill of gambling. The anticipation of placing a bet, the excitement of watching the reels spin or the cards being dealt, all of that triggers the release of dopamine.
So even before we know if we've won or lost, our brains are already getting a dopamine hit.
Precisely. And then, of course, when you win, there's a huge surge of dopamine.
Yeah.
That's what makes gambling so addictive for some people. They're chasing that dopamine rush.
But what about when you lose? I mean, that doesn't feel very good.
No, it doesn't. But here's the crazy part. Even losses can trigger the release of dopamine.
What? How is that possible?
Well, it's because of the anticipation of the next bet. Even if you lose, your brain is already thinking about the next chance to win, and that anticipation is enough to trigger a dopamine release.
Wow, so it's like a vicious cycle?
Exactly. And there are specific things that gambling platforms do to exploit this dopamine system. Like, for example, they often use what's called a random reward schedule.
What does that mean?
It means that the rewards are unpredictable. You might win one bet, lose the next 5, then win again. And this unpredictability actually makes gambling even more addictive.
Really? Why?
Because our brains love surprises. When we get a reward unexpectedly, it triggers a bigger dopamine rush than when we expect it. So the random reward schedule keeps us hooked, always hoping for that next big win.
That's sneaky.
It is. And then there are the near misses.
Near misses?
Yeah, like when you're playing slots and you get 2 cherries and a lemon instead of 3 cherries.
Right.
Or when you're playing roulette and the ball lands on the number next to yours.
Yeah, I hate those.
Everyone does. But guess what? Those near misses actually trigger a dopamine release too.
Seriously? But I didn't win anything.
I know, but your brain still interprets it as a near win, and it gets that little dopamine hit. And that makes you want to keep playing, to try and turn that near miss into a real win.
So the platforms are basically manipulating our brains to make us keep gambling.
In a way, yes. They're using all sorts of psychological tricks to keep us engaged in spending money.
That's kind of scary.
It can be. And it's important to be aware of these tactics so that you can gamble responsibly and protect yourself.
So what can we do? I mean, how can we fight back against these psychological tricks?
Well, the first step is awareness. Just knowing about these biases and how they work can help you make more rational decisions.
Okay.
And then it's important to set limits for yourself. Decide how much money you're willing to spend and how much time you're willing to gamble, and stick to those limits.
That makes sense.
And finally, remember that gambling is supposed to be fun. It's not a way to make money. If you're not having fun, then it's time to stop.
Great advice. So to wrap things up, can you give us a quick recap of the key takeaways from our deep dive into the psychology of online gambling?
Sure. So we learned about the gambler's fallacy and how our brains are wired to look for patterns, even when they don't exist.
Right.
We also learned about the powerful role of dopamine in gambling addiction, and how the platforms use things like random reward schedules and near misses to exploit our brain's reward system.
And we learned about the importance of being aware of these psychological tricks and setting limits for ourselves.
Exactly. Knowledge is power, and the more you understand about the psychology of gambling, the better equipped you'll be to make smart decisions and protect yourself.
This has been a really eye-opening deep dive. So for our listeners out there, here's a final thought. Think about how these psychological principles might apply to other areas of your life. I mean, it's not just about gambling.
Right.
Are there gamblers' fallacies that you're falling for in your relationships, your career, or your finances? It's something to think about. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Until next time.
See you then.
Bye.